Okay, and we're live. Good afternoon, everyone watching, and welcome to our English faculty Q&A live stream with our wonderful undergraduates. I'm Alfie, the Outreach and Admissions Officer. I use him, he pronouns. And we'll just go around quickly introducing everyone. Heta, off you go.
Hi, I'm Heta. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm studying English, obviously, at Worcester College.
Great, thanks. Macy.
Hiya, I'm Macy. I use she, her as well, and I am at Brasenose College, first year.
Wonderful. Iris.
Hi, I'm Iris. I am also using she, her pronouns, and I'm also at Brasenose doing English in my first year.
And Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I also she, her, also at Brasenose, but third year.
Got quite a lot of Brasenose. I didn't quite realise that. And lastly, Maria.
Hey, I'm Maria. I've just graduated. I've studied English in Magdalen and no preference for pronouns.
Okay, wonderful. So, for all you out there watching, if you would like to leave your comments or questions for our lovely undergraduates in the comment section of YouTube, I'll be watching those so I can relay them to them. But I'm also able to look at Slido if you want to leave your questions there. Throughout the day, we've been getting a lot of questions to do with personal statements and with submitting written work. So I think we'll start on that, and I'll just go around, and if all of you could just briefly set out what was exactly talked about in your statement, some kernel of it, what you really enjoyed discussing. We'll go backwards. Maria, you start us off.
Sure. I think one of the main things to focus in personal statement is obviously talk about the books you enjoy and basically anything that you found particularly interesting in those books. So for instance, for me, I've briefly mentioned my love for Victorian literature, but I really emphasized the fact that my newfound interest lies in modernist literature, and I talked about Virginia Woolf, for instance, like stream of conscious narrative in James Joyce, etc. And also mentioned a more personal interest of mine because I come from Russia, and I basically talked about Dostoevsky and how that can compare in my mind to English literature and the interesting links I found between those two disciplines. So the main focus is to basically talk about texts you enjoy and say why.
Wonderful, thank you. Charlotte, what did you discuss?
Yeah, so it's a similar thing I would say, like, as important thing to connect the different things that you talk about. So I think I started off talking about, well, I included some sort of activities, I had like summer schools and essay competitions, but in terms of like the text that I talked about, I started off talking about my A-levels and like something that I'd read as a set text. And then it's Dickens, it was Oliver Twist, and then like went on to say, and then I read Tale of Two Cities, and I sort of said something about that. And then I went on to talk about, I think, Gothic literature, so same period, different, like, and kind of just have this sort of, it doesn't have to have one connecting line all the way through, but kind of just showing that you're aware of connections between things, and even connections between things that don't seem obvious. So I moved on to talk about things from different periods and said, oh, there was an interesting thing in terms of how these things use form or how they use this particular technique. Like, don't have to force it, but if something comes to mind that like connects those things, I think that's something that really shows you really think deeply about the stuff that you're reading, that you're interested in.
Definitely, I think that's a really, really useful comment for people watching. So, Iris, what did you write about?
No, I agree with Charlotte. I think I wrote about things that I knew quite well, like Victorian literature. I think we did test the Devils at school, so we did talk about that. And a lot of my your research project, my coursework was on Hamlet and Look Back in Anger. So these two plays, like between them, which was interesting, connecting two different periods again, but also like how that led on to like the theatre and my interest in like performance and me going to the theatre quite a lot and things I did that were like extracurricular stuff. I also tried to make a link between, like I really like fine art and like graphite, so I made a link between fine art and literature or something. I don't think it was really a very like coherent line, but like one thing leads into another, and your journey, like to show your interest in things, is really important, especially because it has to be very academic for Oxford, because they're much more focused on the stuff you read for your degree and like you're interested in your degree subject than they are, you know, like when you went to France and you like looking at paintings in France, it's not really like relevant to this degree. So that actually showing your passion is really interesting.
Sure. I think that that's a good thing to pick up on just quickly, that Oxford, the writing a personal statement for Oxford, we do want to see kind of roughly 80% of what you write be about your academic interest and what you studied and what your academic offering to us really is. And 20% is more kind of the personal things that make you a person, because we understand you need that there, because you're probably not just applying to Oxford. There are 4 other unis on your UCAS form and they want different things from you too. So to bear in mind when you're building your statement, we would like to see about 80% academic stuff, but obviously that shouldn't be the sum total of your statement. Macy, what did you talk about?
So I can't remember what his title is. Like our Oxbridge outreach officer at school. He told kind of warned me against my personal statement being too pop culture. So he said it's not classical enough. So I used that to my advantage and wrote about so one thing I'm interested in is working class narratives and particularly kitchen sink drama or realism, modernist realism. So I kind of wrote about I used my passion and kind of wrote about how that's represented in literature and how that's represented in how we understand literature and how it's pop culture, or is it pop culture, and what makes it pop culture basically. So I hadn't really read anything I hadn't read too many classics, but I tried to write about representations of narratives and why it's not canonized. So that was something that my tutor ended up picking up on in my interview. So I still managed to write about what I wanted, but managed to kind of give it some literary credibility, I think.
Ooh, wonderful. And Heta, did you write about?
So I applied to university twice. The first time wasn't to any Oxbridge universities, so I can sort of see the distinction between an Oxford personal statement and another. So I would say that the focus is very much on sort of the academic side, but also, as Macy said with hers, just go where your interests take you. So don't feel like you're chained to typically classic literature and that's all you can talk about, because you have to also remember that you'll likely be talking about these books in your interviews as well. So it's important to draw out things that do genuinely interest you, because I think then is where you'll naturally be able to write and talk about it more. So I talked about war literature. So I talked about All Quiet on the Western Front and Birdsong. Then I also talked about The Hobbit and how I like fantasy books. So just don't feel like you're chained to typically sort of canonized books.
Yeah. It's interesting that I applied twice. And I feel a lot of our viewers might be in a similar situation due to the impact of the pandemic and delaying their application. So with your example, did you reuse a lot of your first statement, or did you create something completely new for your second application?
It was completely new. I think this very much had a much more of a focus on sort of literature and really getting into sort of my interests there. Whereas my other personal statement was a lot more broad and talked a lot more about things outside of academia. So yeah, they were two very, very different personal statements, even though they were roughly the same English course.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I'll just remind everyone watching that you can leave your comments and questions in the comment box below or on Slido. I'm looking at both. But yeah, so throughout the day, we've also been getting a lot of questions on written work and what you should submit and what tutors want to see. We've got some answers for that on Slido, but I'd be interested to hear what you all submitted for your application. So let's start with Iris. What did you present?
I submitted an essay on Streetcar Named Desire, which is one of my A-level texts, and it was an essay that we'd done because it has to be a piece of work that you do as part of the course. It's not something you write just for Oxford. So it was an essay we'd written on something, I think it was desire and Streetcar Named Desire. It was like a very classic essay question topic, but then it's a really good point of discussion to show your ideas and where you can be pushed further with those ideas in the interview. So it doesn't have to be a perfect piece of writing. You're not supposed to rewrite something especially for it. I think it was actually quite a bad essay now that I look back at it, but it's supposed to show like promise, I think. It was a really, really regular school essay. Like it really wasn't anything particularly special.
Great, yeah, and as Iris mentions, it's a piece of work that has been marked or produced in the context of your normal studies. We do understand that the COVID pandemic has affected your coursework and your writing production at school. So please look at our website, english.ox.ac.uk, for more detailed guidance on how we'll respond to that. Maria, what did you submit?
With me, it was pretty similar in a sense that it was just a school essay. It was for the, Love Through the Ages bit of the course. And I wrote basically a comparative essay on Wuthering Heights and 2 poems from the anthology. I think it was At an Inn by Thomas Hardy and Garden of Love by Blake. And again, it was, I think, one of those regular essays on forbidden love or something, where you can both talk about, religious imagery and how that's reflective of the psychological landscapes of the texts, and how that also is reflective of what we count as romantic and what we count as quintessentially Victorian. So it was pretty regular in that sense as well.
Okay, nice, thank you. Macy, what did you submit?
Mine again was I just did A levels, so it was, and I didn't have coursework either, so it was an exam paper.
Okay. Right.
But it happened to be like one of the texts. I didn't do very well in A level, so it was only one of the texts. I didn't have very much choice. It was one of the texts that I happened to get a bit of a higher score in, and we did dystopian literature, so it was something it was quite bog standard. It was like political language in dystopian literature or something, and I'd looked at kind of like both looked at like themes and actual language use, and like a linguistic kind of analysis. So it was like half, like a context and a linguistic essay. But again, it was just an exam piece, so it was nothing special.
Cool, thank you. Heta, what did you offer?
So I did an excerpt from my A-level English coursework. So it was comparing Anna Karenina with The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I was talking about beauty and tragedy. And again, I think, like Iris said, like it doesn't have to be like your most amazing piece of work. It just has to sort of show promise. And just, I think there's sort of a misconception that when you go into the application process, Oxford admissions expect you to know everything and know all the answers, but just sort of showing your thought process in your piece of work is enough.
Yeah, certainly. And Charlotte?
Yeah, so similar. Mine was again on Oliver Twist. It was something I'd written in a half term, I think, and I kind of I think it wasn't very long, and so I kind of developed the ideas a little bit. Like, obviously you're not supposed to write anything new, but I think I like developed it a bit and then got it remarked. And I don't remember what it was about at all, but I do remember that it made for a very interesting discussion in my interview. My tutor drew out some stuff and like made it very more interesting. I remember that discussion, but I don't really remember what the original thing was, which just I think shows it was something I enjoyed writing at the time and I was proud of. So I think just shows that the point is that it needs to show them that you're teachable, that there's something they can draw out, and then they can do that at interview, and then hopefully when you get there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So we'll probably end up talking about interviews a little later, but right now we've got a question which is very fair, because I imagine not everyone is familiar with Oxford jargon, so I apologise that we jumped into that without mentioning it. But we're being asked, what do you mean by paper? What is a paper? Is it a written exam that you sit? Is it a portfolio of essays or summative work? Would one of you care to just explain that and what's meant by that? Macy, maybe.
Sorry, do you mean the Oxford, like the way prelims work?
Yeah, so explain what a paper is and then explain how they work in relation to prelims.
Yeah, so we have in first year we sit like 4 papers. So we have paper 1, which is the introduction to language and literature, and this is something that we kind of continuously do throughout. We learn like alongside our period papers. So the introduction to literature and language, paper 1, is like half theory, literary theory, and half like linguistic studies. So that's a different set of skills that you'll learn with a different tutor all the way through your first year. Then we have paper 2, 3 and 4, and these are period papers. So these are papers that tackle literature from certain time periods. So paper 2 is something that you will also do continuously. It won't like change, and that's Old English and an introduction to Middle English. So that's like Beowulf and all that kind of stuff that's probably like new to mostly everybody and a bit random, and you have to learn like random Old English letters and things like that. It's quite fun. You do that all the way through. And then 3 and 4 are period papers that you're probably the most used to, or like the most kind of accessible ones. The first one is Victorian paper, so 1830 to 1910, and we learn that in Michaelmas, which is the first term of first year, so like Christmas term. That's Victorian paper, paper 3. Then paper 4 is modernism, and that's 1910 to the present day, and that's what we learn in Hilary term, which is the term after Christmas. So you do all your learning and your content, and you kind of do things alongside each other, but they all complement each other. Then we sit a portfolio, which is 2 short essays written in a period of about a week and a half, and we sit that in May, and that's to do with the linguistic and the language paper, paper 1. Then in June, which we've just sat, you sit your prelims, which is your exams, which is 3 exams, 1 for paper 2, Old English, paper 3, Victorian, and paper 4, modernism, and that's it.
Wow, I think that was the most comprehensive explanation of prelims in such a short space of time I've ever heard. You certainly do a better job than I do doing that. Yeah, so a paper essentially is a module. It's a thing you study, and then at the end of the paper you sit an exam, also called a paper. On it you have 3 papers which make up your prelims, which is your preliminary examinations. For the first year exams, you only have to pass them. They don't count towards your final grade. And then also that portfolio, which is more like coursework, which is submitted within a paper. That's why the confusion arises, but you get examined in a different way, coursework and exams. Yeah, so thanks for that, Macy. Got a lot of questions dripping through now, but I think another interesting one is, how much flexibility is there in the course to pursue themes that interest you within those period papers? Charlotte, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the flexibility is something that's like a real draw of this course. It's a thing that when we've done these sort of things before and we've said like, what's your favorite thing about the course, it tends to be what people say, because it is so broad. So it's like literature between say 1830 to 1910. You literally can choose any text from that period. It doesn't even have to be like fiction, like it could be like a pamphlet or like, you know, something that you wouldn't think of maybe as literature traditionally. And you can incorporate that into, because when you sit your exams, the questions are very broad and you can apply those questions to any text authors just from within those dates. So yeah, when you're in, you know, week to week, your tutor will be like, oh, we're going to do this theme, or we're going to do this author this week for a class, so read this, this, and this. But then you have a week to do your essay, and you might go, actually, I didn't really like that, or like, I liked this thing, but I'm going to go and look at this thing as well and put that with it. So, and you get, like, if you want to do that, you get a lot of, you can get a lot of support to do that. And if you're interested in something sort of a bit more out there, you can say that to your tutor, and then you can talk about it, and you don't have to go down the, you know, the obvious like traditional text, like canonized text from that period. And then when you get into the third year as well, there's a lot of choice, because you do paper 6, which is like a special options module. There's like 30 different courses and you choose one, and you do your dissertation, which is completely your choice. You know, you write a 8,000 word thesis, or not quite a thesis, 8,000 word essay on whatever you choose. So there is I'd say a lot of flexibility, and it's something that I really liked about the course.
Yeah, wonderful. I think what you just said there about not liking a certain essay is actually really interesting, because you don't have to like everything you write about. You are a person with your own interests and preferences, and you can figure out what those are in the course of a degree. So yeah, Heta, I'll put the same question to you. What did you find about the flexibility, and something you discovered maybe that you really liked without knowing that you liked it?
So as Charlotte said, you learn like such a wide range of texts that you end up studying, that even with things like Old English, where you might think it might be a bit more narrow in terms of what you can talk about, actually you can apply, for example, the same text to several different themes. So it's not just sort of one book, one theme, and you write about this. For me, weekly essays, you'd get options on, and you can pick which essay you want to write about. Sometimes you can even come up with your own essay question. And also, even if you go a week and you do an essay whereby you're not very keen on the books or the theme you talked about, that doesn't mean that come prelims, it's a write-off and you don't touch it. You can study it in your own sort of sphere of learning and then apply the book to whatever you've drawn out of it yourself as well. And as Charlotte said, tutors will support you in like sort of providing places to go in order to look for reading to help that and everything. So I think one of the good things about this course, and there's many, is that there is a lot of variety in where you can go with the books that you choose, and even the ones you don't like, there will be sort of themes and things that you can pick out. And just because you don't like a book as well, you can talk about why you don't like it. Like, I didn't like Uncle Tom's Cabin, and I still spoke about that in quite a lot of detail about why I didn't like it and compared it to things that I did like in the same sort of realm of literature. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You did talk about kind of that negative half of literature, stuff you didn't like. And kind of linking back to personal statements, I think it's more than acceptable to talk about a book you've read that you didn't like and explain why not, and draw comparisons to other things that maybe you didn't like or worse, or things you like better, and explaining why and really looking at that rationale is really interesting for teachers. So we've got a lot of questions coming through now. What's a good one to jump in for everyone? Would you say that studying English has or could increase your creative writing abilities? Maria, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think this is actually a very interesting question, because we are not explicitly challenged or marked on our creative writing abilities. But I think what makes an academic essay, better than, average, right, is a certain creative use of academic language that you acquire if, one, you are very passionate about the text, and B, you really get to know it, right? So there is, say, for instance, one of the fashions in literary criticism that I found recently is that a lot of literary critics like to use some puns, like, something provides relief and throws into relief something. And, this is a quite fun way to use academic language. And I think it can certainly add a sparkle to an academic essay. But in terms of, writing our own poetry or writing our own creative writing, this is not something this course tests. It's very much based on like a more traditional way of doing literary criticism. Saying that, for instance, I did a special course called Possibilities of Criticism, and that course really allowed me to do literary criticism in a more innovative way. So for that, we've studied more philosophical texts rather than literary critical texts. For instance, we looked at Wittgenstein's philosophical investigation. We experimented with a format. So for instance, instead of just writing a bulk of an essay, some people I'm aware wrote an essay about, in Socratic dialogue, or in paragraphs, again, a la Wittgenstein. So, if this is something that interests you, you can definitely choose that in a special course. And also, if you're just into creative writing, English faculty always does a bunch of poetry competitions. But in terms of the main course, academic essays is what is usually looked at.
Yeah, great, thank you. Does anybody here contribute to kind of the creative student voice? Okay, great. Macy and Heta do. Heta, you first, and then Macy. What do you guys do?
So I was just going to say, because when I initially applied to uni, I applied to do English and creative writing like elsewhere. So like going into this course, I was a bit concerned as to sort of the level of like creativity I could get out of this. But I also think in terms of like getting creativity out of this course, lots of writers will tell you to read a lot, which obviously this course will provide. And as you like work on those weekly essays, you will hone your writing skills, even if it's not in a necessarily creative manner. But also, as Maria said, like outside of it's very academic focused, but outside of that, there are also lots of opportunities to get involved with creative writing things. So I write for the Oxford Blue, which is one of the student magazines here. And with that, you've got free reign. You can talk about, if you want, Love Island, do a review of that. You can put in like creative writing pieces. So there is a lot of opportunity to sort of get involved in that outside of the course within the university.
Wonderful, thank you. Macy?
Something that tutors will pick up on is that everybody has their own writing style. How they write an essay is individual, and you might not think about that at A level when we're told, or IB or whatever course you do. You kind of have to hit a criteria, and I'm actually unlearning a lot of that kind of writing style to really try and write like myself. And my tutor really promotes, sometimes I'll write an essay and she'll say, you sound like you. And that's what they're looking for, which I think makes this course so unique, is that you're not being encouraged to write fiction, but you are being encouraged to use your own voice. And I think that's pretty creative in itself. So I would say there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how creative you can be with academic writing.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful answer. Thank you very much. We've got another interesting comment here. Roughly, how many hours of independent reading do you do per week? Now, that's very, very directed, but I understand as students, a lot of your reading is done in the holidays because you have so many texts to get through. So Iris, how do you kind of structure your reading time, both during term and outside of term?
Yeah, I mean, you get presented with these really long reading lists before the start of each year. So I've just got my one for second year, which I haven't really looked at yet because they're quite daunting and you never know where to start. But because, as we were talking about, the flexibility of it, you have to read a bit to know what you don't like, and then you read more of what you do like. And then as the essays go on, it's quite useful to top up your reading with relevant bits of information. So if I was doing an essay, for my Victorian revision, I was doing dramatic monologues or something, but then I found I particularly liked ones that looked at the dynamic between like voyeurism. So my tutor recommended me ones that I could read for that week's essay. So I kind of read little bits as I go along. So poems and plays and short stories are really good for that. I have on occasion had to read a whole book in a week or in a couple of days, in a night even, which is a little bit stressful, but I'm not very structured with my reading, and I tend to like doing it all on the holidays so I know what to build on. And if you have to reread, it's quite easy to go back to what you already know rather than starting something new afresh, because terms are really intense and there isn't that much time to do actually a lot of independent reading. You couldn't read Middlemarch for a week's essay, I don't think. I couldn't. It's like 800 pages long, but you can read plays and you can read poems, and you can always like go back to things throughout term, like they take you a longer period of time. That's how
Wonderful. I do. Thanks. Charlotte, how do you organise your studies? You've graduated now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, you're right, like talking about trying to read Victorian novels, and like, that's, yeah. So I did read a lot over the holiday, but like you can't realistically be completely prepared for term like in the holiday, because your tutors will change their minds and they will send you like the reading list for the week that isn't necessarily the stuff that you will never get through it all. And I think the big adjustment is going from school where you've got this like a few texts that you learn to death and you know them so well, to getting this massive reading list and just going, oh my god, how am I going to read all this? You won't. Like, you kind of have to learn this thing of, like, I think like somebody said, you know, what you want, what do you like, you have to learn to prioritize. You have to like accept that you might go to a class and you haven't read the whole thing, but sometimes the tutors haven't read the whole thing. Sometimes the tutors are teaching things they haven't read the whole thing. Or, you know, my tutor says sometimes don't underestimate how useful it is to read the first and last chapter of a book. So, you know, there isn't this expectation of sort of you suddenly know every book, like, and you've read everything. You learn to prioritize, and you learn to, I'm really interested in this, I'm going to read this. I've read the start of this, but I really didn't like it, and I'll have to just muddle through the class, and I'll because I don't want to write my essay on this, I want to write my essay on this, so I'm going to read that. And yeah, there's definitely room for reading extra things as you go along, and like, don't underestimate the value of short things. Like, you know, sometimes my tutors go, I'm going to recommend you this because it's short and it will supplement what you're doing. Like, I think you learn to be realistic, and you learn to pick the things that are going to be the most useful or the most interesting to you, and that's completely fine. That's what it's about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think it's really good to hear as well that tutors are human, that they can't read everything. You can't read everything. You're not expected to read everything. But an English degree gives you the opportunity to read so much if you love reading, which is why it's such a good degree. Now, I remember I was once kicked out of a tutorial because my tutor, she had an essay deadline which she hadn't finished contributing to a journal. So it's like, get away, I need to finish. So yeah, they're just like us. It's great. Yeah, so kind of on that point you just raised, kind of A-level to uni, we've been asked, how are university exams different to A-levels? And I wonder if you could just kind of briefly set up what the kind of expectation of change is and how you all adapted to that. So Macy, start with you.
I'm smiling because they're 8 hours long each.
Well, I'll just paraphrase that. That's because of COVID and how the university has adapted to that. If the pandemic wasn't here, and hopefully we can return to it, they're 3 hours long. It's still very long. Sorry, continue.
So we have, ours were an anomaly. So basically they were online exams with an 8-hour window. That does not mean they were 8 hours long. We were given an 8-hour time period from logging on to finishing. But in terms of what they are looking for, our tutor basically reassured us that an exam will be about 5% of your knowledge. Whereas an A-level exam, you might try and get absolutely all of your knowledge into the exam to hit the criteria. So really, we had like we were a little bit downhearted about ours because the questions maybe might not have been a representation of what we enjoyed reading or what we wanted to read, but it's all about engaging in the moment and selecting from what you know and using that to answer an essay question precisely. So it's not everything you know, it's how you use a little bit of what you know, basically.
That's a really insightful comment, thank you. Maria, coming from Russia, I don't know if you did A-levels, but how did you find the transition from your school exams to university exams?
I did actually do English A-levels, so
cool.
It's quite fine. So I think the main difference is definitely in kind of how formulaic is your thinking when you approach an exam, because with A-levels you have those like AOs, AO2, which is language, AO3, which is context. And usually people really focus on that and they make sure they tick all the boxes. With the university, this kind of thinking is actually an impediment to writing a good essay, because with English especially, you do get marks for a creative approach to a question. So whilst it's similar to A-levels in terms of you have to answer the question as directly as possible, usually for Oxford exams, you get, for instance, a quote, and the question is usually discuss an aspect of quotation. And you can discuss any aspect of this quotation, which means that the way you approach this quotation can be very personal and very original. And if you can make a coherent argument out of that, and that's the thing, coherence is one of those things that is important both in A-level and university. Analytical prowess is also one of those things that remains important in university, but it's so much less formulaic, and it's so much more important to focus on originality of your approach, and also kind of not just stick to the main text. I think increasingly Oxford is rewarding you not just knowing the canonized text, but kind of verging out, and that's explicitly awarded. So if you're interested in paraphernalia, like random scientific texts and the way they can link to your main argument, that's only a positive thing. So I think the difference in formulaism is the main difference.
Definitely, thank you. Heta, how did you find the kind of change in what you're expected to do in an exam? How did you cope with that?
I think obviously when you write your first essay, it can be daunting and you sort of think, oh, okay, I don't know if what I'm writing is right, but that's what the tutorials are there for, and you'll have them every week up until prelims pretty much. So the weekly essays will put you in good stead for what you end up producing in your final exams. So over time, so, you know, write badly if that's what it means to finish that first essay. At the end of the tutorial, you'll have more to talk about and a bit of a sort of starting point for your next essay, and you'll know what to do. And each week you will get stronger. And even by the time you get to the Christmas holidays, you'll think back to your first essay and you'll be like, okay, I know what I would change with that, and that's a good thing. So I think by the time you get to prelims, A-levels is sort of like a hazy memory, and you will be a lot more confident. It can feel like a big jump, but you are very much sort of guided through that by the fact that we do weekly essays and weekly tutorials to talk about said essays. So by the time you get to prelims, you will be prepared for what is to be expected of you.
Yeah, thank you. You might have just used some Oxford jargony words that we're all so used to, but could you just briefly explain what a tutorial is for people watching?
Yeah, so the sort of course structure for the English degree is that you'll write a weekly essay, and then you'll meet in a class of maybe just yourself, perhaps another student or another two students, and your tutor, who will like set you the essays, do the classes with you, and you sort of talk about your essays. This is before they give you like direct feedback on the actual essay. So you talk about your essays, the themes, your thought processes with them. They give you advice. You talk about the other person's essays and exchange sort of viewpoints on what you liked about said person's essays, what you liked about yours. So basically, it's just like a conversation, really, to draw out more from the weekly essay than perhaps you would have thought of when you were sat writing it.
Wonderful, thank you. So I've got a nice question here. I don't know if any of you are, but I certainly am a slow reader. So how would you give some advice to someone who is a slow reader but is determined to apply to Oxford? Iris?
I think I probably am a very slow reader. I think in a way it's really rewarding being a slow reader, because you do actually take in more detail. I always, when I go through a book now, always try and mark passages I find interesting, so that you can go back to them. And also, the first time you read something, you read it without necessarily knowing which passages are the famous bits or the really useful. You often go to it with a kind of quite an open mind the first time you read things. Reading what you know you like and what you find interesting, learning to tease those things out, because if you can't read everything, because you don't have the time or the reading skills to do that, if you can read effectively, it's really, really hard to know what effectively means. But I was actually quite good having a COVID summer, because I had quite a lot of time to get through the reading list, which I wouldn't normally have.
Nice.
So in a way, make the most of that, and just try and, before bed, I used to set myself like a thing. If I hadn't read 50 pages that day of a book that I needed to read, I would make myself finish that 50 page. You set little deadlines for yourself. That's what I like to do. And I don't know, reading short works is fine. You can, like, some of my favorite books are like 100 pages long, and that's absolutely okay. It's not lazy to read short things and read little, as long as you're reading them intelligently and reading them acutely, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a really nice phrasing. Thank you. Charlotte, same for you. What kind of tips would you give for slow readers, or just reading in general? How you've learned to read as an Oxford graduate now?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, if not all people, either think they're slow readers to start with, or think they are by the time they've kind of, because there is so much material that you could look at. And I've always been, I don't know if I'm a slow reader, but I'm a very sort of diligent reader. Like I want to like write everything down, and I want to, note everything and write notes, and it just seems like everything just takes ages. But again, as Iris said, there's real value in that, in like taking time with a text and really getting into it. It is obviously annoying when you're like, I've got to read these 3 things before this class and I don't have time. And that's where what I said comes in terms of you're never going to talk about the whole thing. You don't need to go to the internet. So it's really quite hard you have to stop yourself and just go, right, okay, this is not important. Like, this is not important for me to write this specific thing. I'm just going to go through, even if you go to the class having read half of it, there will be things that you can pick up. And if you think that Oxford students haven't spark noted before a class, you're wrong. We all have. Sometimes you read some of it and you have some interesting things to say about that little bit, but you don't want to make a fool of yourself. So you make sure you know how it ends, and you're not going to say something stupid. And then you talk about the bits you know, and then you write an essay, and you might read a few other little bits from someone says, oh, when that part happens, you go, oh, that's interesting, and you read when that bit happens, and you find that you're writing essays on moments and passages and scenes of text. That, like, there's this interesting scene in this book and this interesting scene in this book, and I'm going to write a text, an essay just about those two things. You don't need to know, like at A-level, you know your text inside out because there's only a few of them, and you kind of feel like you have to know them all, and you probably reread them, and it's not like that. You can just sort of use these things as like a collage and just pick little bits out, and that often works better, actually.
I think that's a very insightful comment. Yeah, Spark Notes and Wikipedia are everyone's best friend. We don't brush them aside just because they're not academic. You know, if you use them intelligently and you do your reading, then they're just great. Okay, so I'm aware that 3 of you are from Brasenose College, but I think this is quite an interesting question. Does the course, or do you feel the course varies by college? Is it helpful having tutors with specialisms in your college, or does that really kind of get in the way or not? So Macy, let's go with you first.
So on applying, obviously I know you guys have been really hindered because you haven't had physical open days, which is a heartfelt, I feel sorry for you all, because that's one of the things that really did help me. But the other thing that you should really, I think, is really crucial is the tutor. And my tutor is Sos Eltis, and she and her specialisms were a really big driving force behind me applying to the college. So she's interested in 19th century and 19th century and 20th century drama. She loves Oscar Wilde. She loves performance, theatre, female performance, bodies on stage, all kinds of everything. She knows everything. But that was a really big deal for me because at the time that was what I was interested in. So coming to uni and meeting Sos, we've been able to talk about the things that we have in common, but then also she's actually showed me and changed my mind about a lot of things and kind of introduced me to things that weren't her specialisms solely. So I started with the fact that those were her specialisms, and I thought she was interesting. But obviously your tutors are like a fountain of knowledge, and they're learning as well. So it personally for me, my tutor has made a big difference, and obviously that comes along with my college choice. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't have been happy somewhere else. It's a mixture of things, and we receive lectures from tutors at other colleges, and they're equally great. So it mattered to me, but it varies.
Yeah, sure, thank you. And Maria, you're at Magdalen, or you've just graduated as well. Congratulations. How did you find the Magdalen tutors, and did you have them the whole way through, or did you go to other colleges for teaching?
I mean, for me, tutors were really important. I loved them all. Basically, all of them were stationed in Magdalen, apart from my tutor for the modernist period. And so throughout, I had kind of 3 main ones, and with their own specialisms. For instance, I had Robert Douglas Fairhurst for Victorian period, Kate Bennett for the early modern, Laurie Maguire for Shakespeare, and they're all very lovely people. I would say that with tutors, it's not just what text they're interested in, which matters more, but more their approach to literature. For instance, with someone like Robert, who was my Victorian tutor, he wrote a bunch, for instance, on Alice in the Wonderland. But I think in terms of, for myself and in terms of our class in general, his great influence was how we approach the text. So for instance, he would write about, dashes as bridges, and, the importance of punctuation. So getting down to all that detail and expanding the very small detail into like wide concepts, which, some tutors don't agree with. But this kind of approach was something that was new for a lot of us, even though a lot of us were not necessarily interested in the texts he specialized in, but his approach to literature was very important. And the same with like my other tutors. For instance, Laurie, who taught me Shakespeare, she was interested in cognitive science, which meant that one of my Shakespeare portfolio essays used the ideas of a cognitive science to look at some of Shakespeare's plays like Coriolanus. So I think the tutor's approach is very much more important than their particular specialism, even though their specialism can introduce interesting texts, but that's very much personal preference.
Great. Macy, go on, jump in.
I would just say as well, all the tutors, like everything, you think that the kind of components of your course are separate, but they all know all about the other components of the course. So like our old English teacher, Eleanor, she also teaches us some of the paper one, and she's a linguistics tutor as well. And our head tutor is Sos, but Sos can also help us with linguistics. So if there's a part where you're maybe not as much of a fan, you might be able to talk to that tutor about their approach to another part of the course. So they all components of the course and the tutors that tutor them matter, basically.
Thank you. Yeah, so I notice we're approaching the end of our stream time, but I'm aware we haven't talked about, of course, the thing that everybody wants to talk about, interviews. I will say that we're doing this again tomorrow, and we're also having another virtual open day on the 17th of September. And it's probably the September open day where you want to ask more of those questions, because they are, it's close to the time. But just to end quickly, we'll go around everyone. And what was your biggest impression of your interview? What did you enjoy it? Were you terrified? What happened? Maria, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I had 3 interviews, 2 at Malden and 1 big one at Merton. I've enjoyed all of them, although some more than the others. So the way interviews would work is that you get an interview which is text-based. So you get around 10 minutes to look at a text, and then you basically have a tutorial-like conversation about the text with tutors. And then you have a general interview where your tutors basically ask you random questions about your personal statement or things you put down on the list, because before interviews we had to write a list of books we read in the past year, so that, well, at least that was the way it was in Magdalen, and we could put a star next to the works we were particularly interested in discussing, and that was a guidance for tutors. And I really enjoyed my general interview. For instance, my linguistics tutor Simon, again, he asked me the difference between different languages. Then another tutor asked me about the politics of theatre of the absurd. I quite enjoyed that. With the texts, it's quite nice because it's more focused, but and it's more tutorial-like. But the atmospheres of the two are quite different. I think I preferred the general one rather than the text one, because if you don't really like the text, you don't have as much of a great time. But then I had actually a second one based on text, and I enjoyed those texts more, and I had great time. I think that was about pastoral poetry. So that's it.
Great, thank you. I'm aware we're very tight for time. We've run over a bit, so let's keep it really sharp, everyone. Charlotte, what did you remember from interviews? Do you have any tips for people?
Yeah, so mine was a bit different. So I had 2, but both of them had a text in them. So the first sort of had 30 minutes to look at the text. First 10 minutes of each one was talking about that text, and then either talking about written work or talking about stuff from my personal statement. I would say that people will tell you that you might enjoy them, you might, but if you don't, that's fine. One of them I really did enjoy. It got into a really interesting conversation that I really felt like, oh, this is interesting. I hadn't thought about this way before. But in the other one, I was very nervous and I didn't feel like I'd said anything very good. But so I think weirdly the tip would be that just do it in the moment and try. Obviously it's very hard, but try when you can't know. I thought one of my, I was like, he doesn't like me. He thinks I'm stupid, but obviously he didn't. So yeah, the best thing to do is just focus on it in the moment, and if you enjoy it, great. But if you're just really stressed, obviously it's a stressful thing, and that doesn't mean that when you get here the tutorial will be that stressful. It won't. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I think don't overthink it. It's a good lesson for life. Iris, what about you? Interviews?
It was very, very surreal. It was really quick. It went so fast. It was amazing staying in Oxford, and it was really weird to have that much attention on me after my big English, being able to talk about something that you really liked, or things you didn't really want to talk about, but having to. It was really challenging, but I was in a kind of mental blur, and I didn't think I was thinking anything. I was just saying things, but I loved it actually. I think it was really nice having them in person, and I hope you guys would get to do that, because it's amazing being in Oxford and meeting people, even if they don't even get in. Even if you don't get in, just being able to stay there. But you're quite lucky to have an interview if you get one, and just try and enjoy it. It's a really rare opportunity to talk to an expert about texts, and it's what Oxford is, and it's really incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's a conversation with an expert, essentially. Yeah, great. Macy, what about you?
I thought mine had just gone awful. I thought it was I came out and I thought, well, I didn't show any finesse. I was common. I was like all the talk, and I was really, really insecure, sure that I wouldn't get in. And I was just, I mean, at the end of the day, you got an interview for a reason. They were obviously impressed by something. So try and really, think about how well you've done to even get to that point. And that, like Iris and Alfie, you've just said, like, getting to talk to someone like that tutor, if you love your subject, then that means enough. So it's not the be all and end all. I thought mine had gone terrible, and they can't have gone that bad. So just have some perspective, it's okay.
Definitely, thank you. And finally, Heta.
So the best piece of advice I got, which I remembered when I was sat in that interview room, like barely able to breathe, was you don't need to know all the answers. Like, it is enough to just show your thought process. So I got a text and I was like, I do not know what this is about. It's about like a man who thought a rat was following him. And I was like, what do I say? And they just drew it out of me through conversation. And I was like, it was just my thoughts, and that was enough. And it will lead you to places where you can have those brilliant conversations about text that you end up enjoying. So even though I was terrified for my interview and was like breathless and like, I don't know what this means, my interviews were the only point of the application process where I was like, actually, I think that went quite well. And, clearly it did. So just try and enjoy it. You're having a conversation with someone who loves this subject as much as you do. And just remember that they're not expecting you to have all the answers.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. So thank you, everyone, very much for your time giving these wonderful answers. To all those people in the comments who didn't have your comment answered, I'm sorry we couldn't get to you. We're doing this again tomorrow at the same time at 2:00. Or you can pop your question on Slido and I'll try and get through as many as I can. Or if you've got a really specific question, you can email me at undergraduate.admissions@ell.ox.ac.uk. There we go. Right, so yeah, that's the end of our stream. Thank you to all our wonderful undergraduates, and congratulations to the graduates now. Have a lovely rest of your day, everyone.